Okay, so good evening all and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Economy Place Access and Transport Scrutiny Committee. And welcome to those watching at home, if anybody is. Hopefully there are some. We'll get straight into the agenda. Any declarations? Oh, actually, before I get into that, I should say we first have apologies from Councillor Whitcroft, who's been subbed by Jason Rose, Councillor Jason Rose. Thank you for that. Councillor Healy has sent his apologies due to work commitments, and Councillor Nelson will be here, but he's running late, travelling back from work. Usual sort of stuff there, but we'll welcome her in due course. And so yeah, I think that's all for that kind of thing. Yeah, and then we'll move on to declarations of interest. Do we have any, colleagues? Councillor Rose.
It's not a declaration of interest, but I thought for transparency, it's good to call out that I have an electric vehicle and that I don't have my own drive. So in the context of that conversation, it'll be useful information, but yeah, it's not a declaration of interest per se.
Thank you for that, Councillor Rose. Anybody else? No. Okay, grand. Which brings me to the minutes from the last meeting held on the 25th of March. I have no amendments to raise for these. If any colleagues do, please raise. Councillor Hook?
Oh, sorry. The pack's got the February ones in, not the March though. So I haven't seen February.
Yes. But didn't they get signed off at the last meeting?
Yeah. Yeah, they will do, and I've just included the February ones or by mistake.
Okay, so fair enough. So yeah, slight error there, but no great shakes. What we'll do just for officialdom is probably roll these over to the next meeting because the public haven't seen the March ones.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We'll put the March on the next meeting.
Okay, right. Well, thank you for that. Thanks, Councillor Hook. Good spot. Okay, which then brings me to, I need to get the hang of scrolling up and down this thing, blimey. One of the main items on tonight's agenda, which is an update on digital res park and parking enforcement. Oh, I'm having a nightmare tonight. I've not even been in work today. I've got no excuse. Yeah, forgive me. We have one speaker in public participation, and that's Councillor Dave Merritt. Forgive me, Dave, and you know the drill. You have 3 minutes. Fire away.
Thank you very much. I'm speaking here as a Guildhall Ward councillor because both the Res Park paper and the e-charging paper are of significant interest to a lot of the Guildhall residents and no doubt other city centre wards. You know, we had lots of issues raised in the election when I got elected last May, and I've had continued representations about both of these issues since. So very much welcome that you're looking at these two areas, and welcome the first paper. In the first paper, I very much welcome the commitment, I take it, that we will have this upgrade of the system within a few months' time. I'm slightly sceptical because I have been being told that by officers since I was elected last May, and it just seems to be a rolling few months' time. So I hope members of the committee can perhaps nail that one down. And I also welcome the commitment in the paper to reconvene the consultative group in terms of testing out the changes. That will be crucial so that some of the problems that occurred last time aren't repeated. But it will also be an opportunity to make sure it actually deals with some of the issues that we get raised. And I think the two, besides obviously the difficulty with first registering with the system and so on, much of which is now largely out of the way, except for new people moving into the area. The two other big issues with the current system are, one, the loss of the daily permits. If you register digitally, you're no longer eligible. to get the daily permits in the same way. And that is missed by quite a lot of residents and regrets having registered once they realised that they couldn't continue to get them and they're running out of their supplies. The other issue is the fact that there isn't any permit in vehicles, no physical permit in vehicles. And the reality is, you know, I helped set this Res Park schemes up in the first place. First one was in East Mount Road.
About 30
and-
seconds.
and-
Councillor Merritt.
The schemes were substantially self-enforcing because residents in the street wanted to keep spaces for their visitors and for themselves. And therefore they observed when there was an unusual vehicle and they raised it. You know, they checked first, no, it's not got a permit in, ring the system. We are now entirely reliant, in effect, on the very occasional visits from the staff. And that is a fundamental weakness of the change that has been made. So I hope you delve into those two.
Can you please wrap up, because we are already
Yes.
over.
The second paper, I don't think I need to say a lot about, because basically it hasn't addressed the challenge of the terrace streets. This does not move the council on 1 inch in terms of allowing residents in terrace streets to acquire electric vehicles. And I have people who tell me, you know, they're looking to change their vehicle.
Okay.
If they don't get this sorted, they will be sticking to diesel and electric, and that will wreck our hopes of reducing carbon emissions in this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We've been very generous with you there, but thank you for your contributions as ever, Councillor Merritt. I trust that we'll get into the various points you've raised during the main item. But you're welcome to stay for the evening, of course. Fair enough. Well, enjoy your evening. Cheers. So with that in mind, we'll get on to item 4, which is that update on digital res park and parking enforcement. So welcome officers and officer. We have James Gilchrist joining us and the executive member for Economy and Transport, Councillor Pete Kilbane. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining us. As ever, I mean, we can consider the paper as read, but if you want to give an opening spiel before we get into questions, that would be welcome.
Thank you, Chair. So firstly, apologies, because I will do my very best to answer your questions. But the parking manager, Graham Titchener, who you will all probably know, has recently left the authority, and we haven't formally replaced yet. So I'll do my best, but I am working within the level of my knowledge. So as you will remember, we implemented a parking system in financial year 21-22, which replaced an old parking system, but it also fundamentally changed the customer journey, and it allowed online self-serve as part of the system, which meant that residents didn't need to necessarily contact the council at council hours. They could do online self-serve. That obviously, from a council perspective, allows our customer centre to work with those residents who don't have the ability, skills, technology, etc., to use self-serve. So we're sort of looking after those residents more in the contact centre. The other thing that changed, as has been alluded to by your public speaker, is we went to virtual permits in the same way tax discs in your car and vehicle excise duty have disappeared. We're using the same sort of principle as that. So the system went live, and I think it's fair to say we had some issues. Previous versions of this committee have seen a previous report which put together an action plan and a series of measures to resolve the issues that were being experienced. And last time we brought that to this committee, there were 2 outstanding issues, and I've addressed those in the paper. I think the thing I would say is that the issues that we had are very much on the decline. I'm not saying there aren't some things that can be improved. But in paragraph 31, you can see the statistics about how many people are coming into the contact centre or telephoning the contact centre or making appointments about parking, and those numbers are significantly on the decline from where we were previous to the new system launching. Obviously, 2021 was slightly odd because it was a COVID year. So I don't think I would say much more than that, other than the public speaker obviously talked about the timeline of implementing the new system. Implementing that new system requires us pulling together a whole raft of services, not just parking, but we work with the contact centre with IT to make sure that we launch that in a way and we don't experience the same issues that we've experienced previously. We need to make sure we test it properly. So the parking civil enforcement officers will trial it. The contact service centre staff will trial that new version, as will the user group that we set up. So that sort of making sure we get it right is really important this time. It has proved challenging to get all those teams lined up with the resource and the right time to do that, but it remains a commitment that we get that new version out as soon as we possibly can. But other things have taken priority in the work programme is the reality.
Thank you for that, James. And yeah, it's worth looking back to that meeting we had, must be just over a year ago now, about a year and a half ago, where we looked at DigiRes Park just after it was introduced, and there were all sorts of issues then. And I think there definitely has been progress, and it's good that the report captures that. But yeah, I mean, I'm open to questions, colleagues. If anyone wants to get the ball rolling, Councillor Jane Burton.
Yeah. I noticed it says that you get comments. So it's, that the enforcement officers haven't been round. But there are ways of proving that. How do they prove if they haven't been round?
So whenever a civil enforcement officer checks a registration number, because that's what they do, they check the registration number, it logs their location.
Right.
So the handheld unit knows where it is, if that makes sense, when they check a registration number. So we can plot their route and what registration numbers they've checked and where. And that's important if we do get to an enforcement case, we need to prove that the officer did do a 10-minute check, and that's why we do that. We have that process.
Thank you for that. And then when people ring in, and actually maybe I should declare an interest, because I do live in a parking zone very near the city centre, which gets very clogged up, and I did ring in. So I just don't feel that since this DigiParking has come in, that the message is getting through to the enforcement officers, but I also note that you haven't got as many as you had before, so maybe that ties in. Because they were pretty good before this came in, ringing up that within half an hour you'd usually see them, if not sooner.
So I don't think that will be. The system is in effect the same in terms of how it gets to the civil enforcement officers. We are carrying 4 vacancies at the moment, which are out to advert, and that will impact on our responsiveness, but hopefully we'll fill those posts relatively quickly, which will take us back up to the same number we've had previously. So it may just be a blip due to our, people sort of with temporary reduction in resource in the service.
Yeah, I mean, I do note the difference with the paper permits, where you could see if somebody was parked legitimately, and whether your neighbours might change cars quite frequently. Now you can't tell, and I've actually registered to get paper parking permits, but now I can't renew my permits online. I didn't realise I opted for that. However, I'm happier to get the paper permits, as are people in the ward, Middlegate ward. When we went out, we were talking to people about res parking. They all brought this up.
I think so. There's 2 things there. One of which is the the way we've designed the customer journey is that the person who wants the permit is the primary person we're trying to look after. So they either will choose a offline, you know, a paper version, or they will choose a self-serve version. And we're letting those as the primary customer choose the journey they wish to take. Now, I appreciate that a virtual permit doesn't allow as easy a way to check whether a car is parked legitimately or not. One of the things we're looking at and pushing the developers to add into the new release is a way for residents to punch in a registration number and be told whether the vehicle is parked legitimately or not. Now, I appreciate that in itself is a digital thing and won't work for everyone, but it is what we're trying to do to create something, again, a bit akin to what you can do with your tax disc, and you can check a vehicle's tax record in the same way.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose following on from that, the ability to check whether a car parked on the street is legit, as it were. I was wondering how likely that is to actually be rolled out, because that's something that may give some residents a bit more sort of confidence in the system in terms of being able to check, well, you know, is that car parked there legitimately? So it'd be good to have some kind of indication whether that's something that's being explored or something that you think is realistically going to happen. And the second question was around, in terms of income from ResPark, have you noticed a decrease in, which would suggest some residents opting out of buying a digital permit because they're chancing it that they won't get caught out for not having a permit? So does the data in terms of income suggest that is an issue? Thank you.
So two separate questions. The resident checker is technically feasible. Other places do it. So there's no reason in theory why it can't happen. It's just making sure the developer, the system owner, develops that functionality. There's a user group of the system of councils, and we are not the only people saying we want this functionality. So I think it will come. When it comes, I think is probably the only debate, but it will come. In answer to your next question, I would need to go away and look at the parking income data, I'm afraid, which I don't have off the top of my head, but I'm quite happy to share something with the committee about what ResPark income looks like over the years.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Yeah, just on point 7, we talk about the ANPR on the bus lane.
Microphone, please.
Never forget that, sorry. On point 7, we talk about the ANPR on the bus lanes, and then it says in point 8, the council has also applied to government to be awarded powers to undertake moving traffic enforcement for things like banned U-turns and yellow box junctions. Are we saying that the legal powers for ANPR are different to the legal powers for the box? Okay, so it's a higher level, is it? Okay.
So at the moment, councils outside London can enforce bus lanes, but we can't enforce any other moving traffic offences. So right turns, yellow box junctions. Within London, local authorities can do that. The government announced changes to Traffic Management Act Part 6, which allows councils outside London to work with the police to give local authorities the power to enforce those moving traffic offences. Councillor Kilbane, I think, and his predecessor have made decisions to reflect that we will be doing that, and we've made that application to government. Government have said we were going to be listed in an act, but they have decided that we are not listed at the moment while the government review their position.
Thank you. So on that, for example, if the government says, we'll grant you it, how far do you see that working? So for example, I used to work on Bootham, and there's a yellow box junction there into Bootham car park, and we look straight onto it, and every month a cyclist would be meandering along and they'd have a near miss or an impact with a car. Is that the sort of place that the authority would like to ping up a camera, yellow box junction, or, you know, and similar sites around the city? Or is it something where it'd be like, look, we might do this with one, or we might move one? How enthusiastic are you if you get the powers?
I guess if it's an enthusiasm question, councillor Stewart, that better be me, hadn't it? So we have applied for the moving traffic offences powers. We were told that we would be listed to have them. About 3 weeks ago, the bill was supposed to be laid before Parliament, but for reasons that we can only speculate on, it was delayed. And I think that we will receive a decision on whether or not we get moving traffic offences when the government releases its plan for drivers at some time, I should imagine, approaching the coming election, for whatever reason they decide that they're doing that for. So we have applied for them. We don't have to think of imaginary sort of places where we could put them. We would put them in places like the exit to Micklegate Bar, where drivers continually put other people's lives at risk by going the wrong way through that bar for their own supposed convenience. So they're exactly the kind of places that we'd enforce them, yellow box junctions, etc. I mean, hopefully they wouldn't make any money because people comply with the regulations and the roads are kept free for considerate drivers, the vast majority of drivers, to use appropriately. So that's where we are with them, I'm afraid. Very, very frustrating, but currently being held up by national government.
Can I please ask on that, and apologies if this is a silly question, this delay, has it affected all councils who've applied, or is there a select number of councils that aren't on a list but others are?
You can don't quote me on this because it's off the top of my head, but I think there's about 83 councils on the list who've applied for these powers, but they have been, I think the government would say they've been deferred so that they can be, you know, addressed within the plan for drivers. Our fear is that the government's plan for drivers will be, no, you can't have moving traffic offence powers. That's the fear, and therefore allowing inconsiderate drivers to continue to flaunt the rules that the rest of us stick to.
Thanks. Any Councillor Ben Burton?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, first of all, a positive one, I guess, from me, in that I do find it a really good system living on Erez Park Street, and for the chronically disorganised like myself, it's much easier to use than the paper system. But for those who struggle, I mean, it talks a little bit about the support that you offer, but for those who do struggle with the digital transition, what is the support that they have? Is that just access to phone, kind of a more traditional phone system, or how does that work?
So there's a range of options. It usually starts with a call to the contact centre to say, I can't use this system, can you help me? Sometimes we can do that over the phone, but we also offer appointments in the contact centre if people would rather come in and be either supported through it in person, or also some people will come in and will use the system with them and give them the confidence to use it in the future. So there's a range of options we offer in terms of how we support residents who don't have access to it online.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fenton and then Councillor Stewart. Okay.
Thank you. Paragraph 16 on page 11 mentions a meeting between the head of parking and Director for Education about parking issues around schools, which I'm sure many of us are depressingly familiar with from casework. I suppose it's just a bit of feedback in the the now former head of parking came along to one of our ward committee meetings, which was really helpful at Woodthorpe Primary School, and we've hopefully working up some kind of action plan to tackle the issue. But it was interesting, the talking about working with schools. The school were very reluctant for their staff to be involved in any kind of soft touch enforcement because of the abuse, the horrific verbal abuse that they had received. and they have duty of care to their staff, and they're really reluctant to put them in the firing line. So it'll end up being counsellors and a few volunteers that we can pull together. But if out of that work there can come some kind of checklist or some kind of resource either for volunteers or residents or counsellors to refer to in dealing with what's kind of at times seem a kind of intractable problem, that will probably be a good thing to come out of that piece of work. And if we manage to crack it at Woodthorpe, happy to share that, but I'm not anticipating any miracles.
No, our parking enforcement officers very rarely get thank yous, so I appreciate the challenge around that. Yeah, I mean, obviously we'd be only too happy to pick up the experience you've had and work with you on that in terms of any sort of guidance around how advice can be given in a sort of non-confrontational way to parents. I'm more than happy we pick that up.
If I can, Chair, just it's no solace, Councillor Fenton, to know that you're not alone in this area. So it's not just drink houses. In fact, myself and Councillor Hook were having a very similar conversation just a few hours ago, and certainly with yourself, Councillor Taylor. It's a conversation that we have all over the ward for people militantly parking inconsiderately outside school gates, which is takes some getting your head around for sure, but it is something that has emerged through the local transport plan consultation. So it is an issue that's very live, I think, in the city at the moment. And when that will be going out, the initial findings from that and the initial thoughts on a transport strategy should be June. I think they should be coming out. Then we would welcome very much contributions on how we deal with this issue of inconsiderate parking around the school gate.
Thank you for that. I'll come to you in a sec, Councillor Jane Burton. I've just got a supplementary on this particular topic. So paragraph 16, it says to discuss and take forward a new policy. And I'm wondering, does this policy exist yet? Or is it a work in progress still? And I'm guessing it's the latter, and it's open to being shaped, but I just wanted to be clear.
I don't think we have a detailed policy now. We've probably got a working protocol as officers about how we deal with issues at schools. And I think the policy piece that this talks about is working more closely with the schools themselves. So historically, where we've had a complaint about antisocial parking at schools, civil enforcement officers have gone out. The road safety team may view the location and look at whether things are right. What we've started to do more and more is look at actually has the highway and development control team been out to make sure that all the markings are compliant, so that we can actually do some really proactive enforcement. And that work with the schools is the bit of the policy that is probably missing. So as Councillor Kilbane alluded to, we'll be working that into the local transport strategy as well.
And very welcome sharing and contribution to that, because I think what we're trying to do with the local transport strategy is think about these things in the round, really. So why are parents taking their kids to school in the car to start with? So quite a lot of the inconsiderate parking happens when parents turn up at the school in the car, and they get to the school and all the spaces away from the school are full, so they just think, I'll only be 2 minutes, I'll just stop here. Whereas clearly there are zigzag lines there to try and keep the children safe who are walking to school. So I think addressing that pressure would be, so working with schools about transport, updating the transport plans, for example, understanding more clearly why some parents or carers are dropping kids off at school. I mean, quite often it's because they're on their way to work and they're rushed, and time is precious in the morning, as anybody that's tried to get a small child out of the house at 8:30 in the morning knows only too well. So, there are a number of issues that need to be addressed. Not everybody, some parents really need to take their kids to school in a car because of the way that their life is. Or other parents drive their kids 200 yards to the school and then drive home again. So, we need to understand where these different sort of pressures lie and what we can do with the schools. But we fully understand why the schools are reticent to get involved in these topics because they can become quite abusive, which is a shame, but that's what we're dealing with.
Thank you. Councillor Jane Burton, sorry.
Okay. Well, it's very much around this topic that I've noticed that school parking issues can be also an issue for disabled parents and children when dropping off. I, a couple of years ago, looked after my friend's children in Dublin, and they had a very good system of the PTA, but not the teachers monitoring this system. And they had, high-vis jackets on and whistles and all sorts. And I think they do the similar sort of thing in the States in some schools, so that they were keeping the traffic moving in a safe way, and it was slow. And there was a place for me to stop and let the child out, because I didn't feel confident of letting a small child go quite a long distance when I was looking after it. And I'd probably feel the same if it were my own daughter as well. And I can't, easily get out and move around or walk to the school. So I think, could we remember disabled parents and their children, and maybe think about, a group of parents who are interested, because I think a lot of parents are interested in this. Having been a teacher, I have been subject to abuse as well for parking my car quite in a York school when I was teaching in York. So I have experience of that too, and it is not at all pleasant. So I think, it's a very awkward, difficult topic, but I think it can, with the right sorts of input, be solved, but it needs input, but it doesn't necessarily need money as such. It needs a will to do something about it. Thanks.
Thank you for that. James, sorry.
Yeah, I think so. Councillor Burton raises a really good point. You can't, as a blue badge holder, park on school zigzags. One of the things we are looking at when we do that review of the locations is making sure that we have got some double yellows in conjunction with those, because blue badge holders can park on the double yellow lines. So it's trying to make sure we get that balance right and in a safe way. I appreciate that what does happen sometimes is those antisocial parents will park on the double yellow lines as well, which obviously is part of the reason why we're trying to get everyone involved in changing behaviours.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, I think you put your hand up a while back.
Thank you. Yeah, I think actually, as an aside, on school parking, I know we want to get everyone sort of cycling or walking to school, but I do think one of the best things we can do is car share and encourage car sharing with parents. If you can take sort of, potentially 2/3 of the cars off the road by, so it's maybe not making the good the enemy of the perfect sometimes, because people will always drive. The question I wanted to ask is, I'm a big fan of the traffic cops and everything like that, which is probably quite a good thing given there doesn't seem to be anything else on TV at the moment. But one of the stats they always give is the incredibly high number of people who are, ANPR cameras pick up that they are illegally without insurance or whatever. But at the same time, it's very, when you see the police, they'll have the thing beep off and that it will say that so-and-so needs stopping. And you think it should be a lot more. So my question is about, to what extent do our systems, and I very much welcome that you said that we are going to have something, James, so that residents can check on the res parkers. To what extent do our park enforcement officer systems, marry up with the police's? Do they at all? And if not, could they? Because it'd be great if we can sort of say, do some of these checks rather than an enforcement officer having to be jumping out of our system to check if a car's taxed and everything like that.
So, I'm trying to unpick the question a little bit as I talk, so apologies for this. So in terms of if we've got concerns about a vehicle, then we will work with the police on that. And equally, if they're trying to trace a vehicle, they will sometimes share with us. So we have a data sharing agreement between ourselves. In terms of what we use in terms of ANPR, I think we've trialled in the dim and distant past, and other councils have trialled it, is a similar vehicle to, well, it's not a police vehicle, but a vehicle with a camera in that can read registration numbers and can check that against our database. We can do that. The way Parking in York works means it's not hugely successful because as you drive down, you're trying to look at parked cars, not moving ones. And it's much easier with the ANPR in the vehicle to pick up a moving vehicle than it is a parked one, because they tend to be very tight, so you can't see the registration numbers. So we've tried it. It's not been hugely successful. For parking enforcement, the civil enforcement officer needs to give the ticket. You can't issue it through the post. So that even if you use a vehicle, you have to stop it. The enforcement officer gets out, observes it for 10 minutes, which you need to do, and then issues the ticket then. So it's not as efficient as the way the police operate it. So I don't know if that's answered the question, but that's...
Well, the question is more about in terms of how technology develops and the sharing of data is going to develop. At some point in the future, presumably, a enforcement officer will ping in a number plate, and that number plate will tell him, yeah, shouldn't be in Res Park and should therefore have a ticket. But equally, it could say, actually, this car's got no tax or, you know, no MOT. And we presumably will be in that place, whether that's a year down the line or 10 years down the line. So we've got all those sorts of things. The question is, are we there now? Or if, for example, you know, an enforcement officer wanted to do that and thought, well, actually, has this car even got tax? You know, kind of, presumably would he have to go into the general DVLA database separately? Is our data not linked up at all?
Our data is linked with DVLA, but I think DVLA is quite restrictive on. We do have a link with our DVLA colleagues. So at the moment, the civil enforcement officer can scan the registration numbers and it pings direct. So the civil enforcement officers can. Sometimes it's quicker to type them in, but they can choose either to scan them or type in registration numbers, and it's a live check. So that happens now. I don't think, and I will double check, I don't think it does a tax insurance check automatically, but I think that's because of the way DVLA's data sharing works, not because of our appetite to do it, but I will double check. We've got another meeting with DVLA. They are very tight on the data we have access to.
Yeah, if I can, I was going to come back on the car share, councillor Stewart, but I can't resist the police camera action, being a fan myself. So are we looking for kind of parking camera action type stuff? If we get the ANPR moving traffic offences powers, then it does start to move us more into that police kind of field, you know, so I could imagine that the overlays that we can work on will be better, but also it gives us more power to enforce on zigzags. So, you know, we can start to issue those instant sort of fines, which at the moment we can't because we don't have the powers to do it. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that out loud in public, but unfortunately we are somewhat restricted in that respect. But as for the car share, I mean, I think yes, and I think it would particularly work well in more rural areas. And certainly that would be something we'd be encouraging when we work with schools for them to build into their, and it's their transport plans, into their travel to school plans. But actually it also saves the parents cash, doesn't it? Because you don't do that journey, you're not paying for the petrol.
Thank you for that. Before I come to you, Councillor Rose, I have a supplementary on the sort of CYC and police interaction. So I think our officers sort of finish the job, is it roughly around 8 or 9 p.m?
That's when the shift pattern normally ends, but we do run special operations if there are particular issues. I know we've run one not that long ago. It may have even been with yourself. I can't quite remember now. But we do run special operations if there are particular problems. But yeah, the shift rota ends at 8, 9 p.m. time. But we can run later ones if there are specific issues that we need to deal with.
Yeah.
And we've also, within the city centre, given our taxi licensing officers who work later, civil enforcement officer powers, so they can enforce parking offences as well in the city. I mean, they are city centre focused primarily, obviously.
Yeah.
They do have those powers as well, which we've extended out.
Okay, I mean, where I was going with it was to ask if there's any sort of handover from CYC to the police and then back again for when the morning shift begins, or is there a risk that cases effectively get lost? Because I mean, a concern I have is sort of report fatigue. And I'm sure we all say to people, get the reports in, and then there's the data to sort of plan resources accordingly. But if people don't necessarily see action when they might expect it, or if incidents occur at an awkward time across the 24-hour day, they might be less inclined to see that action. Is there any sort of interplay there?
I think there's probably a certain amount of truth in what you're identifying. So I think I don't think the police see parking offences, providing it's not causing an obstruction, as that higher priority in reality.
Yeah.
They will deal with obstructive parking, in fairness, and you know, people's drives obstructed or dangerous parking on a junction, they will usually take action outside hours. But just because a vehicle doesn't have the right permit, they're not going to pay any interest in all honesty. If it is reported, it is picked up by the team, and if there's a trend of that, they will, as I say, deploy special team on outside the normal hours. But I accept the point that that information needs to come to us to trigger that sort of response.
But it doesn't happen as a sort of default.
No.
Could it? Or is it, would it be completely unworkable?
What, in terms of handing over to the police, or in
Some
terms of
sort, it might literally be like, I need one email a night, one email a morning saying these reports have come in that are parking related.
So if it's reported, we absolutely pick it up. So if someone rings the hotline, and the hotline is 24/7, if someone rings the hotline at 3 a.m. and says, you know, there's illegal parking on my street, the parking enforcement officers know about that. I'm not saying they would necessarily deploy a special shift for one offence, but if they got a trend that on Acacia Gardens there was an out of hours parking problem, they would deploy, they pick up that data from the contact centre, say we've got a trend here in our reports. I think the point I'm acknowledging is that if people don't report it, we probably don't know about it, and therefore it probably carries on.
Yeah, I'm sort of, I think I'm more trying to get at in the short term. If something happens at midnight, granted, if and a resident reports it, and our team pick it up the next day, it's highly likely that no enforcement has happened in the middle of the night because the police aren't going to prioritise it. It just seems to be there's a gap or a drop in overall service there, isn't there? And it's not necessarily the council's fault, but that feels like a weakness. Maybe not a huge problem, but
yeah, I think I'd need to go away and look at the data to see how many reports we get to see how big an issue it is or it isn't. It's not something I've picked up, in fairness.
Fair enough. Okay. Councillor Rose, you've been very patient.
That's all right, thank you. Yeah, I'm a relatively, I was going to say fresh-faced councillor, but I don't want disagreements around the table. But you know, only a councillor for the last year, and parking is obviously something that comes up a lot for every councillor, I mean, inevitably. But I have to say, it's hard to know what you're supposed to tell people or supposed to do about it, and there are lots of different scenarios, and just thinking through what we've talked about here, but also some of the other examples. We've got parking on school zigzags and double yellows. We've got parking not related to schools, but related to daycares, which is an increasing problem with the nursery crisis that we've got with more home daycare situations. We've got near me emergency vehicle only parking that routinely has often parents as well as the other two examples. They're not all parents, but often has parents parking in it whilst they're picking up, dropping off for when 20-30 minutes of picking up or dropping off occurs. Drop curb parking over the pavement so that people can't get past, particularly people with mobility needs, but sometimes I can't fit through a gap. Parking, blocking traffic so that you can't actually squeeze between cars parked on opposite sides of the same road, parking in dangerous locations. All of those are challenges that need addressing in their own right, some of which might have different angles of attack than others. Just calling out the 0.9 on page 10 hotline and that number. I reckon most residents don't know that exists and don't know that they can phone up to complain about parking, and certainly don't know when they can or can't or should or shouldn't be phoning things through. If you look on the website, there's a bit of a detailed list, but it doesn't include a lot of the examples I just gave. And so it's more of a general comment around parking enforcement that all I can really do is go, yes, I can see why that's a challenge that you had 2 days ago, forward to council, hope this helps somehow. But actually knowing how to identify that immediate need, how to capture that data consistently, because I'm sure some ward councillors or some neighbourhood groups are more fervent at telling people to report than others. So it's not necessarily accurate data at the moment anyway. How do we make sure we're capturing the right data, but also that we are telling people to go direct to the phone number that gets an immediate response that can actually handle and tackle these things? Because I think fines does help. And then broader, when you have parking issues where they're not illegal, but we know that there's a parking problem and it's growing and it genuinely does impact frequently people, but there's not really any enforcement. Is there anything that we can do beyond that? I don't think that those are questions necessarily for now, but I'm just kind of sharing that. So I think those are the challenges we should be trying to tackle more broadly on it.
So I think there's a couple of takeaways for me from that. So one of which is that, as you will know, and probably all know, we've done some sessions for members on new councillors as training, and I'm not sure we did one on parking, and that might be a helpful one, even if it's just there to drop into as and when you need it. So I'll take that away. The other thing is whether we use some of those examples you've just given and review our website, see whether actually the way we view those examples and what our advice to residents is, so that that's more useful. We can go away and certainly review that. And there was a final one, and I can't think what it was now. But yes, well, oh yes, I'll know what it was now. It was your comment about when there's parking pressure, but there aren't necessarily any rules. So councillors have organised petitions within their wards or consulted their wards on whether they want a residents parking zone or whether they would like double yellow lines on the junction, and we do a review each year of reviewing those. And indeed, I think Councillor Kilbane's got the joy of that in May to go through the 100 or so locations where we're going to be changing those double yellow lines. So there is a way we review that where parking pressure occurs.
I guess to name one other thing that I didn't name before, where probably, well, residents might want double yellows, but maybe they're not logical, but we certainly across Aiken, Westfield and wider have a real problem with parking on verges and frankly, verges that probably should be parking rather than verges in the first place. But you get a lot of people parking that in places where it's just awkward. It's not in the way, it's not a reckless thing, dangerous, but it is persistent. And you do get a lot of residents in an area, broader area, concerned about it. And there's not much necessarily that we can do about the things that are lawful, but maybe we can provide a bit more advice to residents about what they should do if they have those sorts of challenges. I think lots of them would welcome some clear information about what they can and can't do and what we can and can't do.
I can just come back on that, Chair. I think one of the things that I need to check is that when you register for your permit or you register to get visitor permits, you need to check that you get informed at that point what the hotline is to call if you think somebody's abusing the system. I'm not sure. That might happen already. We just need to check. But I just kind of want to cut to the quick on the issue of verge parking, pavement parking, inconsiderate parking, etc. I mean, pavement parking has almost become like a reflex action for many people. It's almost like when you pull up next to the curb, you have to go like that. Otherwise, you're not probably parked. And that just seems to be what a lot of people are doing now. You know, I guess the reasons for that, you could, you know, if you're being superficial, is that people care more about their wing mirrors than pedestrians. You know, it could be that that's the reason for it. But I think probably the reason for it is the pressure on our roads. You know, we put around about 500,000 cars extra onto our roads on an island every year, round about. It's not probably, you know, it's around about that net gain every year in terms of those being registered to those being deregistered, and they all have to go somewhere. So the pressure increases, and people have got less places to leave their cars, so they end up sticking them on grass verges and parking them in places that aren't exactly helpful to people, or parking on pavements and blocking them. And unless we grasp the nettle and say we actually need to reduce the amount of vehicles that are on our roads, then we're just going to eternally be fighting these issues. You know, there's a reason why this wasn't a problem in the 50s and 60s and 70s. There weren't as many cars. those of us who were around in those days can remember. Not many around this table.
I've got a supplementary from councillor Nelson, then I'll come back to you, councillor Rose.
Thank you. Just on that, I just feel like, on behalf of some of the residents who are regularly pavement parking in my ward, there's also it's also worth, just remembering that some of the areas of this city were not built when cars were as wide as they are, and that's no one's fault. And we have areas of the city with very narrow accesses where, I think parking becomes a particularly sensitive issue because, you know, grass verges are great and really important, and we want to have more of those kind of, you know, green spaces in the city. But actually, there are areas, certainly in my ward, where if people don't do some of this pavement parking, you cannot get cars parked on both sides of the road, which is in itself something that needs considering, something that needs thinking about. But the answer isn't always to double yellow one side of the road and reduce the parking by 50%. Particularly when houses don't all have drives, or you know, there's massive issues around drop curbs, access to drop curbs. I know that I can think of a number of places in Westfield where if we were able to offer drop curbs to residents, it would massively reduce issues around parking, but it's incredibly expensive to get your own dropped curb, and it's incredibly logistically difficult. So, you know, yes, pavement parking is a massive issue, particularly where it's inconsiderate because it cuts down pavement. People can't get past, people with prams, people who are expanding at an enormous pace like I am at the moment, and suddenly find narrow spaces to be more narrow than they were before. But I think there's a lot of curb parking that happens for very considerate reasons. And, you know, if we wanted to have a wider discussion about this, I would really like to. I think there's a lot that we could be looking at as a city to increase capacity for parking. My understanding is a lot of those grass verges have utilities underneath them, which means that there's not much you can do to take them out, to add bays in and things like that. But you know, if there was ever an option to offer drop curbs around Westfield, I'd be really pleased about that. I think it would sort of reduce a lot of the issues that you're talking about in certain areas.
Thank you, councillor Nelson. Councillor Rose, you had something to say?
Yeah, a lot of the same points, and certainly people who have wanted to have parking on their front gardens that can't because they can't afford drop curbs is part of the challenge. Certainly roads that are too narrow. Oh no, not even too narrow for modern cars, too narrow when they were built to have people parking there, but we haven't stopped people from parking there. And there will be, moving forward, places where there are pockets that just, they don't have access to bus routes and they need to have cars. We've got an elderly population across large parts of the city, and that's often in pockets where they have to rely on cars to travel for a variety of reasons. And as you rightly say, we've got too many cars on the road. We need to reduce the number of cars on the road in general. But that will mean that these pinch points get greater, even if we can address the rest. Right now, we don't have the money or the political inclination nationally to fix buses to solve that problem. We're going to continue to have a growth in HMOs, in people squeezing an extra house in between other existing houses, and increasing the need to have, well, you know, kids living with their parents till they're 30, 35, and these general challenges that increase the number of cars in certain areas. So you know, none of that's to disagree with your point, that you know, we definitely need to be reducing cars, but you know, we need to be making sure that we're considering what this means in practice. And we can't afford as a council to convert grassy verges into parking, even if it makes sense to do so. So I think some of these challenges are going to continue to grow and grow.
Thanks, councillor Rose. I'm very happy for members to make comments, but please try and keep them relatively tight. Otherwise, it will end up being a long night. Not to devalue what you've said, and you haven't been the only one tonight, councillor Rose. I have a couple more questions, if I may. One's about the hotline. I don't know if other people have had similar experiences, but I've had a sort of niggling concern that whenever I ring them, I tend to have a different kind of experience. So I don't always get asked the same questions. And sometimes they ask what the offence is, sometimes they don't. I'm not sure if that's an accident or if there's a sort of tighter script that they should be following, but it just doesn't fill me with confidence when I use them. And related to that, I wondered if is there any scope to have, if someone rings the hotline and puts a report in, some sort of semi-automated email that says, this is what's happened with your report?
Yeah, I mean, we can go away and look at the customer journey for the parking hotline. It's a national service, so we sign up to it with other councils. So I would need to go away and have a look to see how scripted or not it is. I'm 99% certain that it allows you to make anonymous reports as well as giving you details, but we can certainly look to see whether they can do a feedback loop on that.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson?
Thanks, just a very brief supplementary. It was actually discussed at a town council meeting a few nights ago about we have an issue with parking on the village green in Haxby, and I'm not quite clear as to who's responsible for enforcing that. But a lot of people, residents and councillors alike, or the town council, are reporting to the hotline and finding that nothing gets done about it, and we're not quite sure if it's because the town council is responsible or if, for whatever reason, they can't enforce anything. So I think there's a bit of an education piece as well around that.
Okay, I'll need to pick that one up, but I'll look at that. So it was on the village green in Haxby, was it? Yeah, I'll need to take that one away. Generally speaking, the double yellow lines on the road apply to the pavement and anything inbound of it, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Was it supplementary, Councillor Stewart? No, okay. Councillor Burton, was it a supplementary?
The hotline in the past, I think we used to get a little card with our permits, which had the hotline number on and the hours that it was open. I didn't realise it was open 24 hours, but I think it used to close off at 10 o'clock. But now we're digital, unless people get an email who are registered with the details on. If you, because I mean, I knew about it from the card. I remember it. I mean, it was years ago, maybe 20 years ago.
I mean, by the sounds of it, there's certainly an awareness piece around this hotline and the examples of who to ring for what. Sorry, James.
No, my apologies, because it's not 24/7. It's 7 days a week. It's not 24/7. It's during the enforcement hours. So apologies, I've misled you there. So I will go back and clarify that to explore how. I assumed, apologies. I've just checked. You're right, Councillor Burton.
So if you rang that at 11 PM,
I think you would. Well, I don't know is the honest answer, but I assume you would get a message service.
Yeah,
but I need to double check.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart.
Thank
And
you,
then
Chair.
we'll wrap up in a minute.
Yeah, two comments and two suggestions. So just first of all, on the parking on verges, I do think that, as sort of been said, a lot of it is not selfish driving. It's people instinctively, probably instinctively for the wrong reasons, because they're sort of thinking the car is king and the road should be, they instinctively veer off and think I'll protect some of the road. And I appreciate there are times when it will, be sensible for that to happen in terms of very, very wide verge and narrow roads and that sort of thing. But I think there's a lot of instances of it where people drivers are doing what they think is right, and a bit of education can go a long way in terms of saying you've instinctively done that, but you're blocking it. So I think that's just something we should bear in mind. The second comment is that I think nowhere is there a greater urban-rural divide than in parking enforcement. And it's understandable that you're going to get a lot more parking enforcement in the city centre, but in the villages people would consider there's next to no chance of seeing an enforcement officer. I think that the balance has gone too far, and therefore you can get people in the villages used to seeing bad parking, whereas if enforcement officers just went out there a bit more and were seen, it would soon get people talking. And the two suggestions I wanted to make was obviously, James said that we haven't had any training on parking. I don't think a drop-in session would work particularly well, but I think something like a one side of A4, sort of mythbusters and facts about the hotline for councillors would be a really good, useful training thing. And then secondly, as obviously has said, enforcement officers probably don't have the easiest time. We've all had parking tickets and we probably didn't thank the person if they were there or anything like that. But they are doing a tough job, and I wondered if it was, and obviously we've heard there's difficulties recruiting. I wonder if it's worth us sort of thanking them on behalf of the committee, just saying we acknowledge the work they're doing is not the easiest thing, and we do appreciate it. I'm not a great one for thanking people just for doing their jobs, but I just think it's not the most glamorous. They're probably not being inundated with praise by the residents, so maybe if the committee might want to thank them, and that could just be fed down to the people on the ground.
Yeah. Thanks,
Can I just
Councillor Stewart.
clarify that we haven't all had parking tickets, councillor Stewart?
Some of us don't even drive, yeah. All in good time, hopefully. But yeah, I'd absolutely second that, Councillor Stewart. Thank you for those contributions. I think I've got one last question and then we'll wrap up and try and look at some recommendations if I may. Oh, sorry. Go on. Okay, cool. I just wanted to ask about the recruitment. So we're down on numbers at the minute.
Oh, that's what I was going to talk about.
You were going to talk about it. So I think we're down on normal enforcement officers and the manager's moved on. Is there an external recruitment for that manager or is it internal? Or are we even able to say?
So the 4 civil enforcement officers, I don't know whether the advert is live, but it's in the process. It's been approved through cost control, etc. So that is in the sausage machine to get out to advert if it's not already. In terms of the parking manager, we've got someone acting up into that role. So Jav, who some of you may have met, is fulfilling Graham's role at the moment, while we consider what we're going to do about recruitment on that one. So Graham's only been gone a week, I think, so we just need to take stock and think about what we're doing.
Thank you.
So just from a policy perspective on that, in terms of the vacancies, as you may know, we do have a recruitment freeze across the council at the moment, except for sort of priority areas, and I made sure that the team knew that this is a priority area, that we need to fill those places. But actually, you know, and I quite agree, Councillor Stewart, our CEOs do a fantastic job. Nobody's really ever pleased to see them. I did walk past one the other day and said, "You're doing a great job," and he nearly fell over because nobody ever says that to him. So I'm sure that will be will be passed on to them. But in terms of the recruitment, it is really important that we recruit the right type of person into this job, because it is a difficult job and it takes a certain skill to be able to diffuse that situation where you're issuing somebody essentially with a fine because you're trying to maintain the safety of our road network. And obviously they don't want to hear it. So, you know, it's not an easy job to fill, is what I guess is what I'm saying. So the recruitment sometimes can take longer than usual. And just to finish off really in terms of the you know, the habit of parking on the pavement to the verge. I've got a mate who's a white van driver, and whenever I'm in the van with him and he's parking up, he does that and he goes onto the curb and I go, "Hey, what you doing?" He says, "I forgot you were in the van." I think that's probably the only time he doesn't park on a pavement. People have just got into that habit for the reasons that we've all described, you know, and they're all valid reasons. And it's kind of, what do we do to change that in a world where there's more and more cars coming onto the road every year?
Thank you. Councillor Jane Burton, some final contribution?
I do believe there was intention to ban pavement parking because they're for wheelchair users and you know, using rollators and things like that. You have to then go into the road.
I can come back on that very quickly. So Patrol, which is the organisation of local authorities nationally that lobbies government for powers, has been lobbying for pavement parking powers for many years, but it is resisted at a national government level outside of London.
Thank you for that, and thanks for that quite lengthy but useful and interesting discussion. Be good to have a few recommendations out of that. I've made a few notes here, and I'd welcome members sort of suggesting anything I might have missed. I think first and foremost, I mean, a recommendation to thank the staff. I mean, I think that's straightforward, really, but certainly back that from Councillor Stewart. For the work that they do, it's certainly not easy, and I don't envy them. this idea, I think it'd be worth recommending to the executive member that consideration is given to sort of one side of A4 guidance for councillors on what to say to residents about parking. That was another one of your suggestions, right?
Yeah, not the exec member.
Well, yeah, but it would be the exec member to instruct. Unless he wanted to put it together. But something like that, I think would be helpful. Further to that, there was a discussion about having clearer examples on the council website about different kinds of parking problem and who you might report them to, because some are police, some are council, and some are sadly just annoying but completely lawful. I think the council website could be clearer on that for residents. So a recommendation to the exec member to get officers to look into that. Is that fair? Thank you. And what else have I got? I'd like a recommendation to the executive member to ask officers, so long-winded, to look into the hotline and basically run a consistency check. Just to see, are they asking the same thing all of the time? If not, why not? Councillor Rose?
Just another suggestion on top of that is, as well as the 08 number, can we have an 01 number for the hotline? Because there are people who just won't phone an 08 number out of principle, even though it says free on the website. Might be beneficial to increase more people phoning it.
I mean, sounds simple enough to me. You could, if there's any sort of hesitance from my end, it's because I'm braced for there being a reason why that can't happen. But if that's something we can look at, I think that would be helpful. Then I'd be happy to recommend that. And I've highlighted here schools/parking/safety. I don't want to make that a recommendation because I think that's worthy of it being on the work plan. As an item within all the local transport plan stuff. You know, a specific look at schools within that bigger picture. So I don't think we need to make that a recommendation. Because I'd like it on our work plan. But that's just my opinion. If people see it differently. Councillor Pearson, you look thoughtful. Sorry. For a change, Thank
you, Chair. Yeah, no, just looking at the options on the paper about scrutiny committee could note and close this work stream for now. And I think the bit about the IT systems is probably, right to close it out. But I think the issue of parking in general and parking enforcement is something that we want to continue to monitor. That was my thoughtfulness.
No, it's a good spot. Yeah, so I certainly wouldn't want to close this item entirely. So I'd expect this to come back in a year, where we can see what the state of play is. Maybe not focusing specifically on DigiRes Park, unless there are still things to look at on that front. But yeah, absolutely. Councillor Jane Burton.
Just to say, don't forget the disabled aspect of the school drop-off and parking.
Yes, yeah, good nudge. I mean, I would fully expect that to be part of that discussion. If not, something's gone badly wrong.
I was just gonna, because you never know, it might get forgotten.
Yeah,
It has in the past.
Fair play. Thank you. But that's what I've got. Have I missed anything glaring, colleagues? Councillor Jane Burton?
I thought what Councillor Merritt said about the group being reconvened, especially if there's a rollout of the software update, would be a very good idea. That's to check that it works okay, because it was a disaster when it first came out.
Well, indeed. My understanding is that group will be reconvened.
Yeah, it's committed to in the paper we brought to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is why I didn't necessarily want to ask for it. I was
Sorry.
No, it's worth double checking always. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, it's unrelated to everything we've talked about, but in terms of actions, an issue that I've had is when we've spotted that there is a genuine issue, particularly on dangerous corners, and we've requested double yellows. we get confirmation back, yes, that's going to be addressed. And then there's a suspiciously long pause and there's no way of finding out if there's a list. So once the decision's been agreed that something will at some point happen, I wonder if there's a way of getting a page on the web like there is for future roadworks to be able to just see what's coming, so we can just point residents to that. Just a separate, unrelated thought to everything else, but it might be a useful one for capping off the people who are complaining about parking when we know there is already an agreed plan in place to fix it.
I hear you. I mean, and forgive me if I'm getting this slightly off, Councillor Rose, but what I want to say back to that is that already happens in the form of the minutes from a meeting. So when the exec member does their annual TRO decision session, it will be published which TROs have been agreed or not. Is that what you mean? Sorry, or by that I mean like WLR lines or what have you?
Yeah, well, exactly. If you happen to catch a good press article that lists everything out in meticulous detail, or you read minutes, but there are decisions made between annual sessions as well, right, on certain aspects. I'm just thinking, where if you're a resident, do you go to find out if my street is on the list of things being addressed or not?
I
I don't think
see.
there's any way of doing it right now.
Yeah.
Whereas for roadworks, or if my street was being resurfaced, I know exactly where to go to check if it's on the current list or not. That's all.
I mean, yeah, I mean that seems like something we could do. James, do you want to respond to it?
I think just in terms of the decision making, because it's a two-stage decision making process, so we just need to tread carefully. So a resident might request it. There is then a decision point of, do we formally take that forward and advertise it? And it can get rejected at that point if we say it's not appropriate for X, Y, Z reasons. So, and then we advertise it, people comment on it, and then there's another decision point. So I think we just need to be careful that we don't create false hope by going, you're on a list, then you're off a list. I think we just need to be, and I think, can I take that one away to think through about how we do it?
Sure. I mean,
I get the point, but
Yeah.
I just think we need to be careful that we don't start advertising stuff that then doesn't necessarily.
yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I guess the flip side is true as well. If something has been rejected and we are then as councillors raising the same thing again, or it'd be useful to have the ability to see that information, but obviously take the time to work out what the right way of it is. But I'm just calling out at the moment. I can't personally figure out a way of checking a street if someone's calling it out to me. So if I'm struggling, I assume residents are struggling too.
Thank you. And Councillor Nelson.
Just to add to that, that the existence of a list of may or, which may or may not have kind of work done to it can in itself cause panic. We've had issues recently with, things being on the list. And actually that being a point where residents get really stressed. So on the one hand, it could, it might be useful to know that your street's being considered. On the other hand, if it's not set in stone, like James says, and we know how these decisions go, you do the consultation, there's options to change your mind. It can actually cause issues the other way.
I did obviously only
James?
decisions were made.
I was just going to say, I think I'm 90% certain, if not more, that before each of the decision points, we write toward councillors for their views. So you are made aware of it at the decision points as well.
Yeah. But I think there is probably something in a better presentation of what has been decided, what has been looked at in the past. But yeah, I mean, if you could look into that, that'd be great. But I will wrap this item up now. Robert.
I also had down a review of parking income data. We shared with committee.
Oh
members.
yes, yeah. I've just viewed that as something that the officer will do because they said that they'd look into it following Councillor Fenton's question. I think it was. Yeah. Thank you though. It's good to keep me on my toes because I do miss things. But yeah, thank you for that. I imagine you might be with us for the next item. But I will call a short refreshment break if that's okay for 5 minutes. Thank you all. Cheers. Okay, so welcome back to tonight's Economy, Place, Access and Transport Scrutiny Committee. The next item of business is a report looking at electric vehicle gully charging. And I think this goes back to an item that we had in the previous version of this committee, perhaps over a year ago, looking at electric vehicle charging generally. And there was a desire at the time for the council to have a closer look at on-street charging opportunities, scope. And I think that's how we've ended up here, but I'm open to being educated otherwise. But as ever, if officers want to give an opening spiel and introduce yourself, of course, and then we'll go into questions and all of that, that'd be grand.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of how we got to this point. So in 2020, the council launched its public EV charging strategy, which we did with the Energy Saving Trust, and that was quite a revolutionary document at the time. It was purposely a sort of short-term document because we appreciated the technology and marketplace and everything else was changing at quite a pace. On the back of that, as the paper details, we've made quite a lot of investment into a range of charging infrastructure. And just last month, we were voted as the best place in the north of England in terms of EV provision. So we are performing very well as a city, but the challenges remain, particularly for terrace streets, where there are some challenges in terms of how you do that in a sensible way. Not least because we've just heard the parking challenges in the previous item, which make that more difficult where you have parking pressure. So with me tonight is Andrew Ledbetter. He is much more knowledgeable than I am on this. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew just to add a few more bits of detail to the paper before we take any questions.
Yep, thank you for the introduction. So yeah, this report is a very specific, quite a narrow report just on gully charging, which is the area of interest to the committee. I think the kind of broad brush, as has been picked up on, is we're not, as of today, recommending a change to the current approach. The current approach is that we don't currently permit gully charging within York. I guess the bit of colour to that is that this is still a live conversation within the council. I think that's important to really get over. I've continued to engage with expert bodies, and particularly the Energy Saving Trust, on the broader strategy, but also particularly this issue. And what we've kind of outlined to the committee is that the plan of action over the course of this year is to hold a series of workshops with the Energy Saving Trust, specifically on the on-street charging issue. So yeah, I think as of today, we're not coming with a recommendation to change the policy, but it is something that we continue to actively look at. We are developing a new overarching strategy for 2025, and it is a blank sheet of paper exercise. So we are considering all the options within that. I think the only other thing really that might be of use to the committee is within that decision-making process, we absolutely share the committee's desire to be front of foot on this issue. And I think we've demonstrated in some of the wider policy areas that we have been quite proactive. Where that mindset has to be tempered is when we come up against road safety implications. And I think it's probably useful for committee just to outline that's where we're at with the gully charging solutions at the moment, is that we have identified a number of road safety issues around them. So what we're looking to do in the forthcoming workshops is to work through the detail of those issues, and then we'll be in a position to kind of update stakeholders on the route forward.
Thank you for that. Do colleagues want to come in with any questions, or councillor Fenton and councillor Ben Burton?
First of all, thank you for the paper. I think it's really helpful to understand what's possible, but also what the potential complications are. I think the thing that stuck the most with me in terms of highlights was the suggestion that this works well as a concept in streets which are not permanently heavily parked. And I was sort of thinking of terrace streets, thinking there are very few I can think of that are not permanently heavily parked. So once I'd read that bit, I then carried on reading, thinking, well, this isn't going to work. But clearly, in some other towns and cities, they are trialing an approach that potentially could work. So I suppose a question is, do you think that for it to stand a chance of working in York, there'd have to be a fairly kind of radical review of parking in general, in terms of who can park where, in order to accommodate some of this technology? The second point was just a kind of request in the course of doing this work. Don't overlook those sort of council properties that are council blocks basically, that don't have off-street parking. Don't overlook those properties, not just in terms of the needs of those residents, but the potential benefits that those sites could bring in terms of providing sort of charging facilities for a wider community. Because some of, not I'm suggesting concreting over all of the green space around the blocks, but exploring opportunities for using some of that space to provide more community charging infrastructure, which may temper any disappointment around, well, you can't have one outside your front door, but within relatively easy walking distance. There's a sort of community facility on council land. So just to throw that in as something to bear in mind when you're coming to do that work.
No, thank you for those 2 points. I think on the first point, yeah, so we would agree that there's a challenge between the experience of trial areas, which is one of the clear steers, is that it's very difficult to make this infrastructure work where you've got parking pressures, and you do overlap the areas of interest for us, and they are predominantly res park areas. So yeah, we agree that the first challenge is squaring that circle. And I think part of the approach that we proactively took to the existing strategy is that we were very keen that it sat within wider transport policy. So I think a little commentary maybe on some of the other strategies around the country is you can see some that seem to sit in isolation. And the danger of that is that you have unintended consequences. So I would absolutely agree with the point that when we're looking over the course of this year as to the applicability of these options, something that's front of mind is, does it have any negative unintended consequences? And equally, are they surmountable? I think on the second point, that aligns exactly with our intended policy direction. We are looking at extending the existing resident-focused fast charge point solutions across the city. We're not at the stage yet where we can share the detail of that, but the principle of it is exactly what you've described. We've been looking at council assets and how we can repurpose those assets to improve the accessibility to the fast charge point network.
Thank you for that. I've got councillor Ben Burton, then councillor Jason Rose, then councillor Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think kind of wanted to go back to kind of the basics. I know it's a bit of a weird one because we're having lots of discussions about this when working in the council on the design of housing schemes and kind of the negative impacts that focusing on only being able to supply driveway parking to be EV has massive negative impacts on how we design housing schemes because they become massively car dominated. So it is a really important issue to fix for lots of reasons. I guess the main thing putting people off using our current headline strategy, which is fast chargers, is two things, which is time and cost. What is the price point that we provide parking from our chargers at the moment compared to kind of domestic charging? Sorry, I didn't see it.
Yeah, so we provide a range of charging options currently. So the lowest power level is fast. Usefully, the national terminology is transitioning to standard, which I think will really help with conversations going forward. So we can start from today using standard. So standard is the equivalent to a domestic unit. We're currently at 39 pence per kilowatt hour for that equivalent level. We then have rapid and ultra rapid. We're quite unusual in having the full that full choice of options. We're at 59 pence for those. Now, currently, a domestic tariff is about 23 pence with the new energy price cap. Obviously, that's moving around every 3 months now. So every 3 months, the domestic price cap is re-looked at. I think one of the interesting things in this area is that the gap between the public charging cost and the domestic cost is bigger than everybody would like. There were some short-term elements to that could come into effect quite quickly. One of them is that there's quite a movement to encourage government to reduce VAT on public charging. So currently, public charging attracts 20% VAT, and domestic attracts 5%. So there'd be a 15% reduction off the bat if that change came about. But I think the second point is that you'll see quite a lot in the press about that discrepancy in cost. I think the commentary in the background is that electricity prices have never been as high as they have been over the past 2 years. So when we're looking at that price difference, we're looking at through a lens of what most analysts will say is the worst case scenario. The expectation is that as residential costs come down, commercial costs will as well. So I think where we've guided in the document some potential cost comparisons, they're based on a 10p residential rate compared to the 39p standard. So it's an offset of 29p. And we think going forward, if you have a 29 or 30p discrepancy, we think that will narrow significantly over the next few years.
Thanks for that. Oh, sorry, James.
No, I think the one thing I would say, and the reason York is in a beneficial position, is because we are the biggest provider of EV in the city in terms of the charging facilities. Actually, we control the price and we're driving the price down, which I think is an important aspect of our policy. But I don't know whether you want to touch on that, Andrew, but I think it's probably a narrower gap in York than it will be in many other places.
Yes, that's a fair comment. So part of our strategy thus far is that we use own and operate. And what that does, it allows us to set the tariff. So we have complete control over the tariff setting on our own network, which is complemented by commercial providers. One of the benefits of that has been that we are somewhere around 20 to 30% cheaper than a commercial provider. So again, a lot of the narrative around this is obviously from a UK perspective. A lot of the price comparisons that you'll see quoted are for kind of a 20 or 30% more expensive example than we currently are. And we do think if you look at the consensus of analysts, it does look like that price is going to narrow over the next few years.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah, if you'll permit me to one and done it with a few issues. I mentioned at the start, I'm a driver of an EV it's a year old, kind of top cheap end through work, and so just to share some of my experiences. I think it's interesting to see how good we look on paper compared to the reality, and that's probably more of a comment around elsewhere than it is on us. But 104 total charges is pretty much never going to be anything like 104 working charges. And the description of excellent availability, I would question based on the availability of the charger. There are lots of charging units across the city for sure. But for example, fast chargers at a park and ride aren't helpful because you can't do anything. And we're limited in inexpensive car parks, etc. My experience is that for some of the hubs, you often get there and find only 2 out of the 10 work. For the non-hubs, you go out of your way, you plan a route around going to somewhere, and then it's not working when you get there. And it is significantly more common for BP than for the other services, and they're the ones that we extremely heavily lean on. To the point that basically I pick the 3 or 4 places in York that I find to be reliable, and I go there and plan routes around going on a much bigger detour and a much less convenient detour to try and do it. So 4th place in the country is probably a bad sign for the country. But my personal experience is that I think in terms of the price point and everything else, the usability as someone who can't charge it at my own house, as you've described, fast is not fast, it's 12 hours to charge to full. But those are the cheap ones, and people would have to park far from their house to leave them and abandon them for hours at a time, which is not really an option. For me, that means going to a nearby estate and leaving my car overnight in some other place where they don't want me there, and I don't really want to leave my car there. The alternative is, going to these more expensive places, or charging at supermarkets, etc., which I tend to find cheaper than I find most of our commercial alternatives cheaper than the ones that we're in control of the pricing on personally, not just in York, but when I go to London or other cities, I find that generally speaking, ours are more expensive than theirs. Only motorways are more expensive in my experience. I guess the challenge is that reliance is too expensive, too impractical. This alternative that we described here would cost more for residents, thousands of pounds, plus those other challenges. It's obviously going to be a challenge financially for people to do it when it's probably going to end up being about the same price as a fuel efficient petrol car. So people motivated by the ongoing cost being a lot lower aren't going to find that's really true these days. I think that the paper demonstrates it's not a viable approach to what we're talking about here, with this type of gully charging, included by safety, as you mentioned, due to the types of houses we have. Pavement charging wouldn't be viable for me anyway, because I don't have a pavement outside my house, and so that's going to be the case for lots of people across the city. If I had a nearby 5-minute away charging location that I could leave it and it's not a problem, that's good. So I welcome point 23 for the ambitions of having much more frequent, closer charging. But obviously on a street with hundreds of people, that's not going to be a solution either. So I certainly welcome the point 64, which is around the better pavement and non-driveway options. And I just want to call out, in addition to more of the regular public chargers and the gully charging outside people's houses, we do also need to try and tackle those hubs, because all the best UK suppliers are not in York, and you learn which ones they are when you do a lot of travelling in EVs. And it'd be good to have a more diverse pool of companies providing them, but also to hold to account the ones currently providing them, to make sure that we can see how many are actually available at a given point in time. And I had to go to a garage once that had an EV, and they said it was 3 weeks, they were told, until it was going to get fixed, and it was the only one they had. And that was BP in York as well. So those are a lot of issues that I experienced that I think prohibit people like me from wanting to then have one permanently when they're making that decision. I think the paper's good, it explains it. I think it shows that it's not an easy challenge to solve, but it is a problem that we definitely do need to solve.
No, thank you. I think to kind of briefly summarize that, yeah, I think that is partly the reality of where EV is nationally. It's not where I think all the stakeholders in this field want it to be at this point in terms of maturity. I'd say that, so certainly for our own network, we do monitor the usage data, and we do monitor reliability. And it is from the data that we have access to, which is accurate data. It is on the whole generally quite robust. What we do appreciate is that for individuals, that experience may differ, but we do know from the data that it is generally reasonably good. I think what we would say is that certainly in terms of what you're articulating around wanting more options closer to where you live, that aligns with the process that we're undertaking. So our intention is to have more options to charge closer to where you live. That's what we want to do. We're on a classic journey. We're on a journey here to bring that about. I think as you've always kind of touched on as well. I think so the challenge that we have locally that isn't universal across England, it is the local built environment. So there are quite a few options that work at an England level that when you try and apply them to our actual areas of need, get really difficult really quickly. So what we're trying to do is provide alternatives for people, but within that box of there are a lot of options out there on the market that are very, very difficult to apply to York, and if we did apply them, they come with significant downsides. So I think what you've articulated is absolutely fair. And again, the fact that we are one of the leading authorities in the country is relative. So we are factually one of the leading authorities in the country. I personally share some of the same uneasiness with yourself about that. But we're performing. I think where we would kind of stand our ground a little bit is that we've made a real effort in this area, and what we have achieved is ahead of the provision that a lot of places have across the country. I think particularly regionally, the discrepancy is really big. So if you compare us to our regional partners, there is a significant difference. But no, absolutely, in terms of general principle, what we want to do is provide more reliable, more convenient charging that doesn't cut across transport policy or road safety or built environment issues, whilst also, I think we've also always been very clear within the existing strategy that we have our own and operate model, and we think that brings real benefits. But we've always left space geographically and commercially for commercial partners. We do have a number of the providers in the city. It is growing. And what has been pleasing is that the work that we have done has raised the profile of York with those providers. So we're confident that going forward, we will attract more commercial providers in as well.
Councillor Rose, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, and I guess first thing to say is obviously I come in looking at what we can do better, but there is a lot to brag about. We have got a lot of sites. We definitely were faster than a lot of other councils, and when I go to Leeds, I have a nightmare trying to find anywhere. So there are places that are significantly worse, that's for sure. The bit I want to, I guess, pick you up on is the bit around accurate data on how you know that it's reliable or not. If I go on my BP Pulse app right now, it will tell me that there are 2 cars parked in Nunnery Lane and 12 vacant spaces that are available. If I go and use them, a bunch of them won't work. You phone up and they go, oh yeah, it's been down for 4 days. I've got a report here that says someone's going to fix it on a week on Wednesday, whatever. And they're marked as available. They say they're working, but they're definitely not. And I've had that routinely as a challenge. Similarly, the reverse, which is there's no car parked there. You go into the app to plug your car in and it goes, oh, there's a car that's been parked there for 78 hours. And you're like, well, it's not there. Can I use it, please? So if it's coming from those sources, obviously, I'd say the data is unreliable, but I guess you've got other ways of measuring that.
Yeah, so the data we have access to is actual charging sessions, and that data includes failed charging sessions. So in terms of, we can see if somebody has attempted to start a charge and not been successful, which is really useful from our point of view, in terms of understanding that. So what we've got is we've got detailed session by session data for every charging session that occurs within our network. And obviously we can interrogate that at site level. So yeah, we've got much more detailed data. We're also incredibly fortunate as a local authority that we've got that data going back years. So what we're able to show is trends in usage, trends between the different types of infrastructure, and what has been more or less robust, and that helps us with future planning. So a lot of local authorities, when they're trying to look at this issue, they're starting from a base of having no intelligence, no data, and no experience, and it's an eye opener for them. I think understanding the challenges between what good looks like from a service provider in EV relative to our expectation and customers' expectation is a process that local authorities go through. Where we've got a little bit further than a lot of them is that we've spent the time over a number of years to build a relationship with the service provider. And what we've found is that that's resulted in a significantly better performance for us than local authorities with the same provider, because they haven't built that same relationship. But no, I think I take on board what you said, and I wouldn't disagree with any of it. I guess the grain of hope that we're kind of trying to put back is I think we understand that challenge, and I think we're setting out a route to improve the situation.
Councillor Nelson, you had a supplementary on this?
It's the next question. Oh, but
In that case, Councillor Pearson got in first, forgive me,
Okay,
sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thanks for the report. My contribution, I think, would be around, in terms of the strategy, I'd like to see something that really pulls out about getting private investment, money from elsewhere, because I think we're all aware that we're a bit cash strapped at the moment, and so harnessing, whether it's government money or private money, to take us, we're already, as you say, one of the best in the country. To keep that pace, we need that money from elsewhere. I think I just wanted to sort of make the sort of observation that we've just talked about how there's sort of too many cars in the country in the previous agenda item, and how should we as a council be encouraging and supporting car ownership, even if that might be greener car ownership, especially when, as Councillor Kilbane, but he's all too aware, we're having to do things like cutting bus routes at the moment. I think that's what I wanted to contribute to the debate, really. But it's about getting money from elsewhere, really.
It's probably fair to say that I don't think anybody has been happy about cuts to bus routes, but if Councillor Kilbane wanted to come back on that, it's a minor point, but you know, if we're going to put digs in at the end of comments, I think people have got a right to reply.
The operators who cut the routes, it's, you know, well, if we paid them vast amounts of money, I'm sure they would have run them, but obviously we haven't got a budget to do that, so, and we all know where the budgets ultimately come from, so yeah. And in terms of sort of car ownership, that I think what electric vehicles do, and particularly the more automated those or autonomous those vehicles become, is it gives us a chance to think about how we use cars. So if you look, you know, and I'm as guilty as this as anybody else, you know, use the car maybe 10% of the time, you know, like many people. So most cars sit around doing nothing most of the time. Well, they are doing something, actually. They're depreciating in value for what you paid for it every day that goes by. So I think electric vehicles and advances in technology opens up the idea is that we could share cars more, and that might actually be a way of locating them in neighbourhoods where they can get charged, because there isn't that parking pressure on the vehicle because it's shared by the community as opposed to owned by sort of one person. Because what we're talking about here is public highway, and there is a clue in the name. You know, it is public highway. It's not private highway. So I think there's definitely something in that, Councillor Pearson, in terms of I think electric vehicles offers a great opportunity to think about our relationship with the vehicles that we all need to use from time to time.
It's an interesting area. I mean, it'd be a hell of a shift. The car in itself feels like a very individual thing. I don't know if that's just a Western issue, but if that shift could be made, then
You're welcome to borrow mine anytime, Councillor Taylor. I just hope it doesn't fall apart while you're driving it.
I have my first driving lesson tomorrow, so I'll be in touch to let you know either way. Councillor Nelson, you've been very patient.
Thank you. So just on that issue, also, something that I do think deserves lauding actually is York City Council's membership of the Enterprise Car Club. I am aware that we have lots of workers who need to be in and out of communities and need to be moving around. And, you know, full disclosure, my husband's a social worker, so he's one of those employees who uses those cars. And I think they're a fantastic option. And having, he kind of worked in Leeds before moving to York, and the tussle over the car and who needed the car for, you know, and the journeys that, the additional kind of driving that happened as part of that. The Enterprise Car Club, it's a really great thing for us to be investing in as a city. My question kind of links to Councillor Rose's, in terms of the accessibility of charging points. There's the point about the price, and I think, you know, this is a really lovely report to read, and it says a lot of really nice things. I don't think it says enough about the challenges, because obviously we do want to shout about the wonderful things we're doing, and it's really great what we have achieved and continue to kind of aim for as a city. I think that it is useful to talk about the challenges though. The standard tariff, you know, because the kind of main bent of the policy seems to be at the moment, if you can't charge at home, we want you out in these, you know, these kind of hubs, which are not necessarily in the city. So people having to drive to them, and then people having to sit in their car, which means that standard tariff, even if it is more affordable and closer to what you pay at home, it's not balanced by the cost in time. So I know that we've had some pushback, particularly when it comes to when you've talked about gully parking and the amount of time, my brain's going to stop now, isn't it? When you've talked about kind of gully charging and the payback time. So I'm aware of a resident who kind of disputes some of those numbers because that doesn't take into account their time in that price. So I think there's something to think about there. I'm personally aware that Councillor Rose has spent many hours of his life in Tesco's car park.
Netflix is good.
So I think that we need to think about it a little bit more in the round when we're thinking about those payback times, and the kind of, it might be there's a 30p rate, but everyone's forced onto the 60p rate because you cannot go and sit in a car park for 12 hours. So there's that, and then I have one more thing to kind of mention, but I'll let you come back to that because I can see.
No, thank you. No, this is where I think it articulates quite well what looks like quite a simple thing, and you know, I think it does look simple. Actually, has a lot of nuance to it. So I think what's interesting is if you dig in a little bit to some of the usage cases. So the way that we approached the first strategy was to look at user groups, and then we tried to build out infrastructure that met the needs of different user groups. And one of the principles of that is that we've ended up with the standard charging sites, which are easiest way to describe is overnight. They are many hour charging. And then we've got the rapid and the ultra rapid sites, which are for short duration. I think what we kind of outlined today is that the next investment that goes into the network is focused on the standard. So there'll be a lot more standard charging sites closer to where people live to provide more options on that side of it. But I think it's really closely linked to vehicle utilization and the range of the vehicle. And the danger with all of this is that we speak a lot about average, and obviously there's nobody that's average, and we will all know people that are a mile off the average. I think the reality of this sector is that we have to focus on the 90% of people, and we kind of have to accept there will be outliers that none of our solutions work for. And they never will. We're kind of focused on providing options for the majority of use cases. That's kind of where the reality of this is at. Within that, the kind of average mileage on a weekly basis is about 140 miles. That's kind of an average, most people. So within that, if you think 200 miles is a reasonable expectation for vehicles on sale today and coming to market, and particularly what's interesting with the used market is that the early adopters in EV were buying high specification vehicles. So those are range of vehicles available. If you actually look what was bought, they tended to buy the vehicles with the bigger range. So we kind of say, look, 200 miles is reasonable. The reality is that from the official range point of view, there are mainstream vehicles now coming to market with 430-mile ranges. So when we say a 200-mile range, we are being sensible. We're not saying, look, the official range is 300-400 miles, which is the reality for a lot of the vehicles. We're saying 200, and average usage is 140. So where that leads you to is that you're actually probably going to be charging about once every 7 days, and that's for your 140. Now, if you're somebody that has a bigger range car, it's actually reasonable to do the maths where that charging session is actually every 2 weeks, potentially 3 already with current technology. So I think part of the conversation is the number of times that we're expecting a resident to do this. And I think the base assumption for some residents is that it's nightly. I'm like, look, I'm not going to go 10 minutes walk from my house every night. It's ridiculous. But if you pull it back to what that will actually look like for most residents, it's comfortably weekly and actually could be better. And then if you flip that over to the rapid scenario, so in terms of capability of vehicles that can use that ultra rapid capability, what that looks like in terms of our infrastructure is up to about 100 miles in 10 minutes in the best case. So that's where you're charging pretty low down in the battery capacity. You've pre-warmed the battery, you've tried to optimize your charging sessions. You've done everything you can on your side. You're up to about 100 miles in 10 minutes. So again, that 140-mile range, when it's kind of reflected back that I don't want to make a special journey to a charging site and sit there for an hour and a half, I guess one of the conversations is we would agree with that, and actually that's not our optimal customer. What we find is already most people are using the hyperhubs for about 20 to 30 minutes. And that's genuine user data with the existing vehicles that are out there. We see that charging time reducing as the more modern vehicles come in. And the kind of the scenario of driving to a hub. So one of the principles of what we've done is we've placed the initial hubs around the ring road. And we are intending to build out a southern site. And we are intending to build out a city centre site. And the idea around that is that the majority, you can get into a very strange conversation around this, but if you're doing any kind of mileage, most of those people will leave the city at some point. There are very few people who are doing 40,000 miles a year within the heart of the city. So the concept is that you're passing one of those sites. So we agree. It's a really bad usage case for somebody on a daily, twice every couple of days scenario to be going to a hyperhub and sitting there for 90 minutes. But that's not what we actually see. You're passing the site, you've stopped off briefly. So I guess that's just some context around it. And part of the conversation with residents and part of that conversation about getting the infrastructure right is maybe that conversation around what that actually looks like in reality.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful, actually. And it sort of leads nicely to what my second point was, because it does make sense to have more of those standard, charging points available near people's houses. I'm aware of so we only have a very small amount in the kind of west of York, and most of those are at Lowfield, or a good chunk of those are at Lowfield, where I was very surprised to find that the EV bays are also, my understanding is contractually allowed for residents to park in for all the residents of Magnolia Court. Now, obviously, the residents of Magnolia Court need somewhere to park, but what it means is, as far as I am aware from kind of having conversations with the Lowfield team and with residents with EVs, and there is no way of ensuring that either or any of those EV spaces are available for any EV ever, because all of those spaces are, my understanding is it's within the contract of the residents of Magnolia Court that they can park there. I haven't seen the contracts, but at least it's kind of, it's within an agreement that is understood by everyone that that is both residents parking and EV parking. Which, so that just kind of makes me think, can we be doing more to make sure that when we are putting these places in locations that are near where people live, in 5-minute walks, in 10-minute walks, can we be looking at ways of making sure that EV people are the people who are parking in them? And a final, just a kind of thought is, I know a lot of the analysis about the Gully parking refers to its kind of expense, particularly to residents. It just strikes me that we're a very disparate city. We have many different residents with many different incomes. And actually, if we're wanting to make standard residential like car charging available for people who don't have drives, if they're willing to shoulder the cost, whatever that may be, even if it's that £4,500 that's quoted in here, should we be as a council facilitating that? You know, it's just that's kind of just a thought, but I'll finish.
Yeah, so I think to take the first point on Lowfield, yes. So I think Lowfield is, I'm pleased to say, an outlier. I think there are challenges at Lowfield, and I think that's come about through the fact that the Lowfield charge points were actually a planning requirement. So generally, where the council has installed charge points, it's been off our own back. So we've planned those sites. Lowfield was a planning consent, and by the time that it got to actually installing the charge points, that had some peculiarities around the contracts at the site. So I think, again, I guess to provide confidence to the committee, so Lowfield is not our preferred kind of blueprint for future sites. Where we're installing as part of the rollout of the network, they are dedicated EV parking bays. And I think what we've got to do is manage our way through Lowfield and improve that situation. But certainly that's not our blueprint for charging going forward. I think what is useful touching on is that the planning requirements are very useful in terms of providing wider coverage, but we're not defaulting to planning regulations in terms of network management and planning. In terms of Gully costs, yes, so I guess context is always useful, isn't it, in understanding these reports. So the cost points specifically in there, because I think one of the reasonable points that residents will make is that Gully solutions are incredibly cheap. I know we've had quotes previously about kind of £50 Gully systems, and that is what will enable people to make the finances work on an EV. So the reason why that kind of cost comparison is in those is a bit of, yeah, but you know, in terms of what would actually be delivered, it's not quite the same. I think there's a really interesting point. We are going to be developing the next strategy from a blank sheet of paper. And one of the things that we are interested in looking at is whether there is a mechanism to promote shared usage from residents that already have facilities. So again, one of the benefits of the geography of York is that quite often these challenging streets will be right next to streets that may have off-road parking. And there will be residents on those streets that have a domestic charge point. And there are already systems in the background that allow residents with a charge point to open that up to other residents. So one of the cases we will be exploring in the strategy is what is the actual scope of that. I think in terms of narrative, it's something that feels like it fits really well with the York ethos. I think sharing assets, a point that's quite often missed from this, is that the best outcome is if you can find a system that's usable, that residents want to use, and the finance adds up, that network should have as few assets as possible. Whereas most of the entities involved in this sector are selling something. So the preference that you'll see a lot in the media is that everybody has an individual X. So the nirvana kind of at a NASA level is that we've currently got 36 million privately owned cars and about 5 million vans. So we're about 41 million in terms of vehicles of cars and vans. And the national preference is you have 41 million charging assets. And I think our view locally was that we don't agree that's a fantastic outcome. So I think, again, to give Scrutiny confidence, we're looking for solutions that work for residents, but it would be great if those solutions don't cut across existing transport policy. And we don't just blindly go down the route of the endpoint is 38 million charge points. The challenge clearly, as we've discussed tonight, is finding the reality in the middle. But it's a process that we are going to dive back into this year, and we will have, we'll have something to share going forward on what that potentially looks like.
Thank you. And can I jump in on that, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Stewart. So in that next strategy, and just to press on Councillor Nelson's latter question, in the next strategy, if there are cases where residents are happy to pay what is a large amount of money, and that's their own investment choice based on whether they think it's better for them in the long run, and there are ideal locations and related transport highways policies can be amended, could we see on-street charging in the sense that this report is looking at? Because that's why we're here. It's about on-street, totally accept all the other great work that's going on, but this discussion needs anchoring on this subject, I think, as difficult as it is.
I think in terms of policy, I can pick up a little bit of that, and it is, as Andrew says, it's a blank piece of paper in terms of looking at what the next generation of charging is, because clearly, it's going to be electric vehicles well, unless there's further rolling back on the deadline, then it's going to be electric vehicles in 11 years' time, isn't it? Because there'll still be some legacy petrol and diesel vehicles out there. It is a blank sheet of paper, but the challenges that are highlighted in this report remain. So there may well be those ideal locations that could be identified for sure. But I come back to the point that I made to Councillor Pearson before, which is that this is a public highway. So nobody on the public highway has the right to park in any particular place on the public highway. So what we do have, where you've got residence parking zones, is you've got the right to tell people they can't park in them.
Yeah.
But within that zone, you've no right to park outside your house or anybody else's house. Like, you just find a space and you park in it. So that challenge will remain. The challenge of trailing cables and all of the issues that can involve will also remains. Because if you don't get to park outside your house and you need to charge your car up to do a long journey in the morning, you're going to be very tempted to run that cable down that highway and plug your car in. I mean, I think that's kind of human nature, that you would probably think of doing that. So that challenge remains. I mean, I think there may well be, policy-wise, trying to fit in with the direction of travel that we've got with transport in York. If you've got a designated disabled bay, for example, outside your house that only you can park in, then maybe, as I said before, if you've got a designated car share that's an electric car, then potentially, but the supply for that wouldn't be coming from anyone's house. The supply would be coming from wherever we are on the network. So, you know, we're not absolutely, from a policy wise, we're not saying no, never, you know. There could well be instances and places where it will work, but those challenges that are in the paper remain.
Sorry, yeah, fire away, Andrew. And then I've got Councillor Stewart and Councillor Pearson, and then I'll wrap this up if I may. See how we get on. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I think the officer view aligns very well with what Councillor Kilbane has just outlined. I think what it's useful in saying is we're not, from an officer point of view, ideologically opposed to these solutions. We do understand the potential benefit to the user, but it's unfortunately our role to balance those benefits against disbenefits. And we do see some of the biggest challenges being around the road safety issues, where I think there are solutions to some of those, but they come with a long list of then unintended consequences. So yeah, basically what Councillor Kilbane said, plus just I think a reassurance that I think some residents have got the viewpoint that we're actively opposing this for some reason. It's not that. We've got a duty to make sure that our decisions are balanced, and if any decisions are made to bring forward options like this, then that paper would very clearly outline what the issues are as well. And that's what it's got to be about. It's got to be an informed decision rather than just a kind of, yes, let's see how we get on.
I guess one of the tensions there might be, though, that I would dare to suggest that there will never be a scenario where there won't be some sort of drawback, and at some point the council will have to be willing to say, yeah, we'll do that, but we know that this is going to be a bit of a pain in these ways. And
yeah, so it's basically it's articulating the pain. So what the process of the workshops we're undertaking with Energy Saving Trust is to actually go through the detail of that. And if the pain is immaterial, then that's what goes in the paper. If the pain is, look, we think somebody might actually die at some point as a result of it, then that's what goes in the paper. But that's I guess that's what we're kind of reflecting back is we haven't chosen to make our life harder by responding to residents and saying you can't have this option for the fun of it. It is based on that we think there are actually some real issues. The flip side of that is the reason why we've been following Gully trials for 5 years now is that if we get to a point where there aren't any downsides, great.
That never happened.
Fantastic. But yeah, it's just got to be when those decisions are taken. I think from an officer point of view, the important thing is that the council is making that decision with full visibility. I think the danger in this space is councils wandering into a position on these solutions without actually fully understanding the ramifications.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, you've been very patient, and then Councillor Pearson, likewise.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I think obviously it's been to the committee before when I've not been on, and my knowledge on the subject is not particularly high. And so I'm going to talk more about electric vehicles than this particular Gully specific. And I think my knowledge of electric vehicles before would have broadly been, look, we need to get more of them because more sustainable and obviously cut down on air pollution. And I'd be sort of looking at when we invest in electric vehicle charging points as, oh, that looks a rather larger amount of money than I thought it would have been, and a lot of the reliability issues that Councillor Rose has articulated. But what I don't think I understand well enough is the simple sort of commercial side, like Councillor Pearson has said to a large degree, in terms of, for example, if we as a council had nothing whatsoever to do with this space at all, and then we moved into the space in terms of charging points and everything like that, it's for me to understand the economics of that. And you know, I don't know, genuine question, whether other people on the committee think they'd be interested in seeing that sort of paper. And by that, I mean, you know, a couple of the sort of just specifics. Are companies that are commercially operating in the EV charging point market Are they operating entirely commercially, or is that a very subsidised market? I just don't know. And the second, or one second question, for example, is where we talk about what we charge compared to commercial companies, and we might be cheaper, we might be more expensive. Are we seeking to be cheaper, or are we seeking to be more expensive? Because an argument sort of for both of them, or are we seeking to set a price, and if others follow it or don't, then we're indifferent to that. And so for me, it really is that sort of commit to try and understand that, and obviously a lot of the money comes from government, and so we've got some big amounts of money coming from the government over the years, to try and understand that if we, for example, didn't put anything into 10 charging points being built, what this, or if we did, what it would cost us, and then looking at things like the payback periods. We've got some payback on particular things here, and so that's what I don't understand, and that's what I'm not an expert on. And yeah, in terms of cost per charge, I mean, for example, I know people that have put in a charging point for themselves. I know what that costs them. I know what they're going to save in terms of, they think by not having a petrol diesel car, so it's quite simple. But for the council, to know what it costs us, to know what we get in income, to know how much we're subsidising that by, and that's what I just genuinely, don't know. I don't expect you to answer that now, but maybe those two particular ones, and then maybe the committee wants more on it, or maybe everyone's knowledge is far higher than mine.
Yeah, I can give a very quick summary of that. So in terms of commerciality, the issue with commerciality is the discussion we've had tonight. So the bit of the market that has no commercial interest at all is resident standard charging. So that's the challenge. So if as a local authority, you're not active in that space, then you won't have anything coming forward for residents. The bit of the market that is really commercially attractive is particularly trunk road, motorway service, high-powered charging. That's a commercial sector. So the issue for local authorities is the bit that matters to the local authority is the bit that isn't commercial currently. In terms of price setting, so the principle that we set our tariff on is that the council recovers the cost of operation of the network. So once we've built assets out, we've been tremendously fortunate in attracting a lot of grant funding for building the assets. Once the asset is built, the tariff is set on an annual basis to ensure that the network has no cost implication on the rest of the council. But the flip side of that is that we then don't drive a profit through it. So for the user, the assets are there, which they wouldn't have been had we not got involved. But also they're getting a better deal, and we do have national tariff data that shows how we compare to national tariffs. So yeah, basically commerciality, the gap is our area of interest, and price setting, we operate the network on a no cost basis. Currently, we are about to obviously develop the 2025 strategy, which is the opportunity to reset that principle.
Councillor Pearson, thanks for waiting.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to, I think Councillor Corbett actually talked about it, about the highways being a space for everyone, and hopefully in a safe way. I'd struggle with that even if a resident was prepared to pay all of the costs to install a charging point in front of their house. There's no guarantee that they could then park there. And there's the whole issue of electricity supply and all the rest of it. So I would worry, I personally couldn't support that kind of policy because I feel it raises too many unknowns. But what I would like to see is those local charging where we potentially look to give up chunks of road space for charging bays or whatever, but that those charging bays would be funded as far as humanly possible by outside investors, and that's where I think the commercial argument comes in. That perhaps you stay there for a little while, and then you move on and let the next person charge up. But that would be a far more supportable initiative and policy and strategy, because I think the council has too many other transport initiatives to spend on which are more important. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Thank you. Sure.
Just policy wise, I mean, obviously the council is very skint. So attracting investments is clearly a way forward, external private capital. One of the issues that we need to be aware of when we're doing that is sort of who owns the asset. So if we got somebody that came in and built some EV charging infrastructure for us and then they went bust, who's responsible for taking it over or delapping it, you know, reinstating the highway, whatever it is. So there's a few things to work up. I think this policy paper that's coming forward is exactly the kind of space where we need to be answering those questions, as well as the cost neutral stance that we currently have that Councillor Stewart raised. They're all up for grabs in terms of this paper.
Go on, Andrew.
Yeah, I think just very quick, I think just to reiterate that the challenge is that there isn't a commercial offering in that resident focused charging piece. So there's probably the last bit of central government funding coming forward. And that is reflecting that situation where if as a local authority we went out to commercial market and said we need standard resident focused charging, there is no business case for that. So what we're looking to do is we'll be bringing forward the proposals on what we're seeking to do, but I think we've got the opportunity to have one last significant investment in that network. And again, what we're going to look to do is we're going to seek external funding for our match element, which obviously would be the best scenario. So if we're not directly paying for that and we get the assets, that's a win-win.
Thank you. Right, I've had a few hands, but I'm very conscious of time. So I had a hand from Councillor Jane Burton and then Councillor Anne Hook. Were they supplementaries? And Councillor Rose was waiting as well.
Very quick.
Sure.
Okay, just a couple of things to do with disability. And we were talking about, on-street parking. Well, that can be a problem for blind and visually impaired, which is in your report, which is a concern, like the bins that are left out, like the recycling boxes. Also, though, I would say that, if you are disabled and you live in a street like that and you have a bay, which is not dedicated to you, but is a disabled bay outside your house, then you're probably in with a good chance of being able to charge there and not being able to, you can't do the walk, the 10-minute walk or whatever it is, or the 20-minute. I understand why that exists for other people. And I know that's been a concern for the York Disability Rights Forum Access Group, about, the visually impaired aspect of in-street parking, with the charging bays. My colleague, Councillor Burton, found quite a good alternative, I thought, which were...
Yeah, well, if they've got the paper coming through now, so you can jump in the mix, can't you? I thought I won't raise it now that you're doing a whole consultation on potential solutions. But yeah, this is hanging it over the highway. But I'm sure, as I said in the email, that runs the risk of, I don't know, someone getting tangled in wires, and then they're pulled up like a puppet on the side of the road and all of this. But also letting the issues that we have with people digging up highways in the city and the problems that creates, doing that outside lots of houses has its own unique problems, doesn't it? So avoiding digging up highways is also a problem.
And then just finally, that be careful when you're repurposing car parks and putting EV charging points, that you're not taking away blue badge bays and putting them in them, because they're the most convenient places to put the charging bays, or we're going to be, in a combat situation once again, which would be such a shame.
Yeah, no, thank you for those comments. So on the principle of dedicated space on street, this is the opportunity. So drafting the next strategy is the opportunity for us to relook at those scenarios. And it's one of the areas that we've identified internally as something we want to spend an amount of time on, making sure that we get the right solution. I think it's a really important decision point. And I think it's something that we've got more scope to do due to the smaller number of on-street assets that you're looking at, as opposed to a general rollout. And certainly in terms of car parking, it's something that we're very aware of internally within the team. We're doing a significant amount of work on that as well. And I think what's been useful is in the interim, in the past 4 years of us rolling out assets, we've now got guidance. So we've got PAS guidance on what high quality disabled access looks like in the charging world. And we've engaged quite strongly with that. So we're looking to make our future sites PAS compliant. It's also steered through the latest round of government funding. So it's something, I think it's an area that we would like to relook at. I think it's a good opportunity as we develop next strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Hook, you've been very patient. And then I will wrap up if I may, because we're nearly at 8 o'clock and we still have a work plan item.
Okay, I was just sort of thinking about the future, which you've got to plan for, because the future is not that far away now. And one of the problems is going to be batteries that you have to keep charging all the time, like my phone battery that got thrown across the car yesterday. And also the fact that what's going to happen to all the petrol stations? Are they going to be built over like the one in Poppleton that became housings, or is it going to be used for charging? And you need to get the commercial people involved to try and encourage them to stay as charging points rather than housing points, unless you want the housing, of course, which is good.
Yes, I think on the first point about battery life. So battery life in the automotive world is a lot more positive than it is in mobile phone world. So the existing legislation in the UK, any car sold for past about 6 years. So there's a lot of used cars that fall into this well. They have to have 75% of the original battery life remaining at 8 years old. If they don't, it's taken back up to 75% under warranty. Now, it'll come as no surprise to anybody that when car manufacturers agree to a warranty period, it's because they thoroughly expect to exceed it. And that's exactly what's happened. So the legislation is 75%. The reality is that 80–90% is what we're actually seeing. So that's with relatively old battery technology as well. The stuff that's coming to market now is even better than that. So battery degradation is a lot less of an issue than we feared back in the day. In terms of petrol stations, so there are a number of commercial entities who are very focused on converting existing petrol stations. So any petrol stations, I mean, I think the first point to make is the current government phase out date of 2035 applies to new vehicles only. We're going to have a significant number of conventionally fueled vehicles past 2035, past 2040. Basically, if you rewind the rationale for it, the Committee on Climate Change originally proposed 2035 as a mechanism to get nearly all of those vehicles out of the fleet by 2050. That's where 2035 comes from. So there will still be significant demand for petrol stations, but the ones that do close, there are commercial entities who are specifically focused on that bit of the market.
Thank you for that and for all of your answers. Appreciate you bringing all your knowledge to the table. And thanks to members for their questions and contributions too. Might anybody have recommendations to suggest for this? I mean, I'm quite comfortable with basically saying to colleagues, we know that the new strategy is to be worked on, hasn't been launched yet, and I'm sure you would, well, you officers collectively, the executive member, would welcome input ideas from all members on a sort of ongoing basis. But if I'm missing anything there, colleagues, feel free to put your hands up. Okay, well, we'll work on that basis. Thank you again. I really appreciate it because you had a fair wait before you even got started tonight. So cheers. So colleagues, that just leaves us with the work plan item, which we wanted to look at in a bit more detail than normal tonight. Due to the fact that we have a whole new year to try and fill. Which is actually, sorry, Robert?
I think just before that, we did have the sort of brief verbal update on how the task and finish group was going.
Ah, yes.
I don't know if you want to do that
Well,
first or
yeah.
after the work plan.
No, thanks for raising that. I wasn't certain if the Dial and Ride task and finish group had something to share tonight. If you do, I'm happy to hear it. Councillor Fenton.
Yeah, just give a brief verbal update. We've concluded our information gathering interviews. I think we've had 16 between the three of us, which has been a bit of a slog, but it's been very, very useful, and we've gathered lots of useful information. We've had, I think the last count, 40 representations either via email or via letter or phone call from users of the Dial and Ride service or family members speaking on behalf of users. So there's a lot of information which I'm busily typing up, but is not in a form to bring back to this committee. There was an executive member decision session. No, it was an officer decision fairly recently in relation to Dial and Ride. One of the next steps was for the public transport team to produce a paper detailing future options in relation to Dial and Ride. So what I'm aiming for is for our report to be done to bring back to this committee, I think realistically 25th of June, at the 25th of June meeting. And for that piece of work to then be passed over to officers to say, this is what we've done, this is what we found. Officers are doing some work to look at options, and hopefully that can inform the work that officers are doing. So that's my thinking at the moment, which I haven't yet had a chance to discuss with colleagues, but we can have it when we've got the bare bones of the report. We can have that further discussion.
Okay, thank you. Grateful for the update. Which sort of sees us nicely into the work planning item. I mean, a provisional sort of list of ideas has been circulated. I have sort of sought steer from officers and executive on when it'd be good to have certain items coming through in terms of their timeliness with regards to decision making. I've had some input on some items, so I don't think we're going to finish the work plan tonight, and it should be a living document anyway. But I am aware that in June there'll be some sort of executive decision or update on the local transport plan, and with that, I think it'd be good to use our May meeting to have a good focus on that. If we could cover what that consultation ended up looking like, what the response was, what the administration sort of initial steps following that will be, priorities. Councillor Kilbane, you've mentioned that public transport is a theme, a dominant theme in it so far. I mean, May comes around quick. The end of May will still come around quick. The next meeting is the 21st of May. Is that enough time to have a meaningful report for this committee?
We could certainly bring you a report. I think, yeah, it's not far away, so we will need to obviously put pen to paper relatively quickly now in terms of publication 7 days before. So it will be, I think it's fair to say, I don't think it will be a pre-decision scrutiny on June. It will be these are the emerging themes, these are the thoughts.
Okay. Yes, councillor Kilbane?
I think, you know, just to hold officers' feet to the fire a little in committee. I think it needs to be meaty when it comes here, doesn't it? And I think we've had quite a lot of talk. We've had so much consultation. We've had, quite a lot of talk. I think it's also, we need to be looking at some action. So definitely, the overview, which I'm sure you've already seen, of the local transport consultation, it clearly showed the buses are, better buses, better bus service is a huge priority for the residents. And how are we going to, what's our early thinking on how are we going to do that? How are we going to meet that aspiration of our residents? And I think it would be good to us to bring something around that public transport piece to this committee. It's like, these are our thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would welcome that, councillor Rose.
I guess the question around that for me is, and it's attached to it in the work plan suggestions, is the mayoral situation. So what's the role in general local transport plan, but public buses and other aspects of that? If that's going to only be a fledgling conversation for May, then forming those plans and getting agreement and buy-in from those partners might, I don't know what the timing of that would ever be in terms of when it's the appropriate time to ask, but that's my only thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a report could try to address that. Is that a hand, Ben? Sorry, now. Yeah, I mean, we'll have a mayor in post then as well. Of course we will. Councillor Kilbane.
Just if it helps, obviously it's up to the committee what it wants to do, but I would suggest that by the 14th of May, which is when you'd need to be publishing the papers, I would think it would be unlikely that those roles and aims had become clear. I mean, they may have, everything might get sorted out in the first week, but it's unlikely that those roles, responsibilities and areas of input would be totally clear by the 14th. Well, actually, the officers would also need to write the paper, the officers of a combined authority that doesn't yet exist with an officer corps as such, being directed by a mayor that we haven't got. So, I mean, I think, yeah, that would be quite a tall order.
Councillor Rose.
I guess specifically on that point, I was making that assumption, whether we want to bring something that is ignoring the mayoral in May. I think probably the question for me is more, is June even early? Is that too early for conversations with the mayor and post? And that same question then applies to a lot of the other transport in particular, but some of the other things on here, like car parking provision, might be something that we would want to wait to see. If we're saying this is our ambition as a council, it completely doesn't align with what the mayor's vision might be, that might be a challenge, that's all.
Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely a big supporter of the whole local transport plan. So I think it's a really big issue, and I think it's great to get it on the record at this meeting. Something that's better than executive because people can feed in. Personally, I wouldn't be a fan of doing anything major on the mayor yet. I'd let Keane get in post and then see how he does things. Well, whoever it may be, whoever they may be, I favour them getting in post. And then, we see how things go, particularly because I'm really mindful of in the next year, how can we make a difference? And I think there are some issues on here, which are some really good issues where we could look into them and make a meaningful difference. Whereas I think there's other issues on here where they'll be on the agenda, the report comes in, we look at it, and then another committee will look at it somewhere else, another committee will look at it. We won't have meaningfully made a difference. So I would personally say we've got a duty to look at some of the mayoral things, but for me, that would be a few months down the line, so we can really pick up what particular aspect we want to do of Keane or whoever's work.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Kilbane, did you want to say anything?
It's good that the acknowledgement that not everything is going to get sorted out in the first week. So that's good to know. I mean, I don't know how quick David. I'm not sure how quickly David's going to be able to get it all.
Okay.
I think it'll be relatively quickly.
Councillor Hook, you had your hand up. Do you want to make a similar comment for the yellows?
I know that Felicity will be totally brilliant, but it's buses, and I think we need to put our cards on the table what we would like, and then the mayor can work off that. But at least they know what we want rather than what they think we want, and that's what I'm thinking. That we need. It's never too soon to say what we'd like.
Yeah, fair play. Bish bash bosh. Councillor Pearson.
So, thanks, Jay. You just done that. I think there's a piece that has to be submitted to government in June. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I wonder if that piece could either come to scrutiny at some point or.
Yeah, so there's a bus service improvement plan update. It's relatively light touch for York. It's significant for other authorities that have got their first draft of BSIP funding. So I think it's North Yorkshire's first allocation. So they've got to write a BSIP plan for June. Ours is a much lighter touch of, you've given us a bit extra, but we still need to update the plan and we are on with that. But we can add that into the mix for the May report. That's not an issue.
Okay, yeah, that'd be helpful. I mean, I'm minded to suggest that that might be enough for May, because it's such a big area. I also want to say, I don't want us to necessarily do every single month right here, right now, but some updates for the committee's awareness are that I've got a heads up that the finance and performance monitoring reports we should receive in July, September, November, and March. Now, obviously, you know, we don't need to go into them in too much detail, but that there was a suggestion around digging into this 900k of savings in the place area. I think those reports will hopefully speak to that, rather than having a separate item for 900k of savings. But I'm open to challenge. Other things to raise are in June, we'll have the dial and ride item. And we've got a council officer, Samuel Blythe, who wants to do a presentation or speak to the committee about a York pipeline of proposals for the combined authority. Now, this officer is going to all of the scrutiny committees, starting and ending with Councillor Fenton's, I always struggle to name it. Yes, corporate scrutiny. So in June we'll have that item. We'll have the dial and ride item. I did provisionally put Yorkshire Water in there, seeing as we didn't get them last time. I think that would make for a tasty June. And then, I mean, it depends how much detail you guys want to go into it tonight. Would a reasonable step be for me to email members a sort of rough, here's where I've put your ideas for now. Some of them, I haven't managed to put them in for every month yet, but, and then you can tell me if things need to change, and then that can be made public for the next meeting, because it's going to get more and more secure as each month passes. But basically, out of all the ideas and suggestions that I've got from members and exec members, I've populated some months, but not all. So, for instance, January 2025, the garden waste collections and how the implementation of the charging is going, because I'm assuming by January we should have something to say on that. But there'll be time for officers to tell me that that might not be ready by January. I'd like to think it will be, but another thing for January, keeping with the waste theme, Councillor Nelson, keeping with the waste theme, we'll review the bags to bins item or piece of work. So that was a suggestion from a member. But look, I can email this out and give me your feedback. I want to try and concentrate themes so that we're using the same officers in one night. And then for May's meeting, we'll have a much clearer list, and we'll still have gaps so we can put things in reactively if we need to. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, just the officer coming to talk to us about the combined authority.
Yes.
That's not particularly exciting me from a scrutiny point of view. I mean, an all members briefing might be, you know, a better thing, particularly if he's going to CCS, you know, all that fun and games. You know, but I think that something where, you know, an officer comes just to talk to us, it's not, you know, that's not scrutiny. It's about us delving into particular things, I think, rather than being here to learn stuff. And certainly if he's giving the same talk to two committees, for me, that should be an all-member briefing, which would be a great thing to have, rather than it be taking a big chunk of a meeting.
Councillor Fenton, as scrutiny chair, do you want to respond?
Yeah, it's not a, you know, I'm going to talk to you and you know what I'm telling you and it's all pointless. It's it's the opportunity of this committee and the other scrutiny committees to be able to put forward suggestions for that pipeline of projects that are things that are relevant to the work of this committee. If we've got nothing to say, nothing to add, it'll be a very quick agenda item. But I think it's important in terms of making sure that, you know, York's ask of the mayoral combined authority is informed by not just the executive, but by members across the piece, and scrutiny is one opportunity for us to do that. So hopefully it will exceed your low expectations for that agenda item.
You are Mr. Scrutiny, and it has got the public excited outside that topic. We'll go with on that basis.
Okay, so look, we'll move forward on that basis. I'll share this provisional. This is where I'm fitting items version of our work plan. There'll be plenty of space to move things around and add to. Officers, do you want to say something, James?
I was going to say, if you could share that with me as well, because I'll look at the officer resource we've got. I know we've got a few vacancies at the moment. I might want to suggest a few tweaks around.
Yes, that'd be helpful. Yeah, definitely. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I mean, I won't receive that because I'm not a usual member of this committee, but when you share it, it might be useful to share which things are point in time because that's when the report lands, which things might be point in time because we can fix when it's coming, and there might be big ticket items like tourism levy or toilet provision or whatever, and which things probably are dependent on a moving time frame. And therefore might slip, because it just might help inform a bit of
absolutely. I'll do that to the best of my ability. I'll need input from others to let me know that, but yeah, that would help. So thank you all for that. I think the next item is any urgent business, but I might have missed something again. But I don't think there is any urgent business, so we'll call the meeting. Councillor Rose?